Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are diving into one of the most talked about topics in the news right now, the growing trade tension between the two countries. From a bold trade from Canada to cut off energy exports to President-elect Trump's plans for tariffs, it's clear that this situation could have major economic consequences for both nations. But it doesn't stop there. There are warnings from CEOs, speculation about interest rate cuts, and concern about how all of this might affect consumer prices. It's a wide range of reactions, and people are really starting to weigh in on what this could mean for the economy, jobs, and your wallet. So, in today's video, we are going to break it all down. What is actually happening? How are people reacting to the escalating tensions? And most importantly, how could these moves affect you in the long run? So if you want to stay on top of what is going on with the Canada-US trade battle and what it could mean for the global economy, make sure you stick around. Let's dive into all the details and hear what people are saying about it.
The president-elect is threatening harsh tariffs against America's top three trading partners, Mexico, Canada, and China. Already, U.S. CEOs are warning if President-elect Trump does impose new tariffs, they will be passed on to consumers as higher prices. Best Buy CEO saying the vast majority of that tariff will probably be passed on to the consumer. Home Depot's CEO warning there certainly will be an impact. And Walmart's finance chief saying tariffs are going to be inflationary.
Doug Ford literally has no idea what he's doing, and he has to be one of the dumbest people on earth. He just threatened to cut off all energy from the US if Trump imposes the tariff. Here's the thing about that scenario. It does not end good for us. Our tariffs are going to go from 25% to 50% if he does this. I can guarantee you, because that's exactly what I would do if I were Trump. And that's why he's not worried about it, because we have no negotiation power. That all went out the window the moment Trudeau openly bashed and backstabbed Trump, thinking he was never going to be reelected again. All the liberals spoke ill of Donald Trump. They implemented crazy policies. The whole Trump team literally disagreed with everything they did with the Emergencies Act. They were disgusted by it. Most Americans are actually disgusted by it. Trump has been trolling Trudeau. He literally has no respect for him or for the liberal government. And the worst thing you can do is what Doug Ford just threatened to do, is to have retaliatory tariffs, because that's not going to stop this from happening. It's just not. The best thing he could have done is what Danielle Smith said she would do. She said she created a new task force. This task force is going to monitor with high-end technology, high-end drones, the border. And she just flat out said today, this is a terrible idea. They do $122 billion in exports. That's what Alberta does. And she's got a good point. Why am I going to create tariffs only so it could go to the federal government so they can just waste it? There is no point. So what is he doing? He needs to learn from Danielle, because she knows exactly what to do, because her province is so energy rich. They can create so much revenue and so much business, not only for Alberta, but minimize the amount of taxes that Albertans pay. Because Trump is looking at expediting approvals process. We're probably going to have a continuance of the transcontinental pipeline. If I were Trump, I would probably put something in place to make sure that it can never be nixed. Once it gets signed, it is done. There's nothing that the government can do. Otherwise, they have to pay something like $500 billion. That's the way I would do it, to make sure that that pipeline always goes through, because it's in the best interest of both countries, especially Canada. But I'm telling you, he has the intelligence of a D-level student. It's embarrassing.
If Donald Trump follows through with his 25% blanket tariff, then the Bank of Canada could lower rates to as low as 1.5%. Here's what that means. As you could guess, the Canadian dollar would take a pretty big hit, with economists predicting a pullback of between 5 and 10%. And we would likely see high inflation, with prices increasing due to higher importing and exporting costs. The general sentiment is the statement is not as credible as it seems, and it's unlikely we would see a 25% blanket tariff, but it's more so used as a negotiating tactic to then impose more targeted tariffs on certain industries. Nevertheless, the Canadian government's decisions are a little less unified with an impending election, but let me know what you guys think that means for the economy and for the real estate market.
If you put tariffs on China, prices will go up. Donald Trump did exactly that. Manufacturing came back and prices went down for American citizens.
This is not true. After the series of tariffs passed in 2018, U.S. consumer prices for affected goods rose. Boom, boom, and boom. This is in contrast to the Chinese and non-Chinese goods that were not affected by the tariffs. And then China responded with retaliatory tariffs, and that affected our export prices. American producers and farmers had to lower their selling price to China in order to compete. Source: after doing a little bit of math and science, they find that tariffs exhibited nearly complete pass-through to the consumer. The incidence of the tariff lies largely with the United States. This is not an isolated result. Another paper here looked at the large 20% tariff placed on all imported washing machines. They found that the price of washers and dryers rose after the tariff, that's the red and blue line, and this is in comparison with other large appliances which did not see a price rise, the refrigerators in green and dishwashers in yellow. Some might be saying, hey, I'll pay those prices if it means saving US jobs. Okay, I'm sympathetic to that goal, but is this the best way to do that? Washing machines became more expensive, and that resulted with a total cost to consumers of $1.5 billion every year. We can divide that by the number of domestic jobs that might have been saved, and we find a cost of roughly $900,000 per job. Now, where did that money go? Not to the workers. They were making a salary a tenth of that. It mostly just vanishes into thin air. Less trade means less efficiency. Tariffs gum up our production processes. Throwing a wrench into the machine to save a mechanic's job is not a path to sustainable prosperity. In fact, once we take into account all the effects of the retaliatory tariffs, this paper finds that U.S. manufacturing experiences reduction in employment and increases in producer prices. And you can see the picture here. Less employment and higher prices. A recent paper looked at the counties that were affected by the trade war. Protectionist tariffs didn't save any jobs, and then the retaliatory tariffs had a clear negative employment impact. There's a reason why economists from all different political backgrounds agree that tariffs are borne by the consumers.
Trump has proposed a 25% U.S. tariff on Canadian imports, which could devastate Canada's economy, with some experts calling it catastrophic. 2/3 of Canada's GDP relies on trade, and the U.S. is its largest trade partner, with over 2 million jobs dependent on U.S. exports. Additionally, the Canadian dollar decline could make everyday imports like electronics and vehicles significantly more expensive. And Ontario's premier calls the threat a family member stabbing you in the heart. And Trudeau has scheduled a meeting with Canada's premiers to discuss the issue. And Poilievre criticized the proposed tariffs as unjustified, expressing concerns over the potential impact to Canada's economy.
What Trump did is place tariffs on Chinese imports. By the time the imports get here, China's been paid for the stuff. Maybe they get net 120 terms, right? But in a sense, China has already transacted. The American company who brings the goods in pays the tariffs.
Really?
You're kidding right now.
No, I thought he said he was raising the tariffs by 50 to 100% for Chinese imports.
The tariffs are paid by the company that does the importing. So if you want to build a building in the U.S. and you import Chinese steel, you pay China for the steel, you pay the U.S. government the tariff. This is why it's inflationary. Economists have looked at Trump's tariff proposal and said it would make stuff more expensive for Americans by adding the cost of the tariffs to the total cost of production. So that's the way tariffs work. A lot of people don't seem to know how tariffs work, which is sad because this is how people end up getting sucked into Trump's vortex. He says something that sounds good. I'm going to punish China with tariffs.
Yeah.
In this case, that sounds good. Chinese tariffs. They're paid by the American companies.
Wow.
That's why it's so damaging.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Send me this part of the
No, I
conversation.
will. I genuinely had no idea. I thought China was paying those.
Yep. No, China's not paying them.
Yeah. I thought they were, though.
They weren't. They're not. Yeah.
So why would he do that? I'm confused.
You'd have to ask him.
Will Trump's 25% tariff on Canadian goods push us into a recession, or is it just political posturing? Let's break it down. First off, what's a tariff and why does it matter? Think of a tariff as a tax on goods coming into a country. It's designed to make imports seem more expensive than domestic products. But here's the catch. The cost doesn't stay with the businesses. It's passed on to you, the consumer, raising prices on everything you import, like groceries and cars. Why does this matter to Canada? Well, number one, if there's there's a tariff imposed on our goods, once our goods get to the US, they're going to be more expensive in the US. And the US is our biggest consumer. So if the prices of our goods become more expensive, then less people in the US are going to buy them, and we're going to lose our customers for our goods. If businesses suddenly can't sell their goods, then that means they're not generating that much revenue, and then they have to start laying off people, and we have job losses, and that's what a recession looks like. And don't forget, as our economy goes down and we have to reduce interest rates, it also lowers the Canadian dollar, which then means that everything we import from the US is even more expensive because the US dollar is so much stronger than ours, and it costs us more Canadian dollars to buy those same goods. But here's the big question. Is Trump serious, or is this just a negotiating tactic? We've seen this play before. Bold claims leading to renegotiated trade deals instead of outright tariffs. What do you think? Is it bark or bite? Let me know in the comments. For more real estate and economic insights, follow me here and share this video with someone who'd find it useful. If you're looking for tailored advice, book a call with me.
A pillar of Trump's economic plan is enacting tariffs to punish bad behavior and bring jobs back to U.S. workers. Here's the history of tariffs and their impact. A 1962 legislative change allowed the president to impose tariffs without Congress's approval. Trump doesn't need consent. The most far-reaching tariffs were imposed by the U.S. in 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. The intent was to bring jobs back to the U.S., but it backfired. It caused retaliatory tariffs by 25 major countries, resulting in a 65% reduction in global trade, severely deepening and lengthening the Great Depression. Fast forward to today, and Trump has the same plan, but is looking for the exact opposite outcome. Maybe this is all just a Trump threat, but wasn't that what they said in 2018? When Trump did start a trade war with China, look at the S&P 500 that year. It dropped like a lead balloon. Last point, inflation. Tariffs at the simplest point are a tax on imported goods, naturally driving costs higher. And if we are successful bringing jobs back to the U.S., look at the cost of labor in the U.S. versus the 3 leading tariff targets. What do you think that does to the cost of goods? Now, to be fair, Trump's other economic pillars should help our economy grow. But if you're looking for the risk being overlooked these days in an everyday higher stock market, look no further. Tariffs are it. Hit the follow for unbiased daily financial updates.
Tariffs. Let's talk about it. Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States, and one of the things that he ran on was global tariffs. If you're curious about inflation, I just did a video on that, and if you're curious on my opinion on the overall election, that was 2 videos ago now. Trump's proposed tariffs aim to bring manufacturing jobs to the United States, to make up revenue to offset his tax cuts, and to generally make the U.S. more independent. What is a tariff? A tariff is a tax that is applied to imported goods when they cross the U.S. border. It is important to note that the businesses that are doing the business in the United States are the ones who ultimately pay the tariff. So if I'm a company that wants to sell products in the United States and I make them in China, then I would pay the tax when I try to import them to the U.S. to sell them. I would pay that tax to the United States government. So let's say I'm a U.S. company that produces t-shirts in China and my cost to produce one t-shirt is $10. Then when I bring them to the United States and I sell them, I'll sell them for $11. This means I make $1 worth of profit on each t-shirt. Now let's say Trump decides to impose a 10% tariff on all imported goods. That means my $10 t-shirt, when it's coming through the US, I now have to pay the US $1. So now my cost is $11. But if you recall, I was selling those shirts for $11, which means I no longer make a profit. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm now going to charge $12 for my t-shirt so that I can still make $1 of profit on each t-shirt, which means the people buying my shirts in the US now pay $12 instead of $11. This is why tariffs are ultimately inflationary. Now the goal is that this will encourage US companies to move their manufacturing of t-shirts in this case to the United States. But labor in the United States is more expensive than in other countries. It is unlikely that I will be able to produce that same t-shirt in the United States for $10. So even if I do decide to move my manufacturing to the United States, odds are it would still cost me more than $10 to produce that t-shirt. So prices would probably still go up on end consumers. Furthermore, there are many countries that are really good at producing specific stuff. The same way the US is really good at producing specific stuff, like technology. Oftentimes, importing a tariff on goods from another country will result in a trade war, which means the country that is tariffed will actually apply tariffs of their own. If we apply 10% tariffs to t-shirts from China, they might apply 10% tariffs to iPhones from the US.
Now note, this stuff is very complicated, but I'm trying to simplify it in a way that makes sense to a lot of people. There are a lot of economists who have done great research on tariffs, and Trump actually did impose tariffs on washing machines coming to the United States back in his first presidency. The end result was that there were some manufacturing jobs created, but actually the price of washing machines went up across the board for consumers. It was a very expensive way to make new jobs in the United States. By the way, I did not talk at all about the security implications of tariffs. This is actually a really good reason to do tariffs, for example, with semiconductors. I purely talked about the economical piece. Now follow me for more content.
The current trade tension between Canada and the United States are creating waves across global markets, and it's clear that these issues are far from simple. It all started with President-elect Donald Trump's promise to impose heavy tariffs on foreign imports, including goods from Canada. This move has already led to strong reaction from both the business community and governments, particularly in Canada. With such a large economic relationship between the two countries, there are widespread concerns about what tariffs could mean for both nations, especially in terms of jobs, consumer prices, and overall economic stability. One of the most significant developments in growing trade standoff came from Canada itself. A senior Canadian official recently warned that if Trump's 25% tariffs on Canadian goods becomes a reality, Canada might retaliate by cutting off energy exports to the US. This is a major concern because Canada is one of the largest suppliers of energy to the United States, particularly oil and natural gas. Approximately 60% of Canadians' oil exports go to the US, which makes the threat highly impactful. The energy trade between the two countries is a lifeline for many US states, especially those in the Midwest and Northeast. A sudden cut-off of this energy could lead to significant shortage, driving prices up sharply and causing potential disruption in the energy sector. But why would Canada even consider such a drastic move? The answer lies in the fact that energy is one of Canada's few bargaining chips in this trade dispute. By threatening to shut down oil and gas exports, Canada is sending a clear message to the US that these tariffs have consequences not just for the economy but for energy security as well. If energy exports were halted, the US could be forced to look for alternative sources of energy, which could take months or even years to establish. In the short term, this would mean higher prices for consumers in US, and industry that rely heavily on affordable energy would suffer. The threat is a clear form of leverage, but it also underscores the significant economic interdependency between the two nations. The question now is whether the US will take this threat seriously or if it will escalate the conflict even further. Moving on from the energy issue, we have to consider what economic measure Canada might take to offset the effects of Trump's tariffs. According to Douglas Porter, the chief economist at BMO, if the US imposes these tariffs, Canada may be forced to respond with aggressive interest rate cuts. In fact, Porter suggests that the Bank of Canada might slash the overnight rate by as much as 350 basis points within a year, bringing it down to just 1.50%. This would represent a significant shift in Canadian monetary policy and could have far-reaching consequences for the economy. But why would Canada cut rates so drastically? The idea behind cutting interest rates is to stimulate economic growth by making borrowing cheaper and encouraging spending. In a situation where Canadian exports are getting hit hard by US tariffs, the Bank of Canada could try to mitigate the negative effect by lowering interest rates to boost domestic demand. However, this comes with its own set of challenges. For one, a rate cut might help in short term, but it could also signal that the Canadian economy is tired. Lower interest rates generally indicate that there is less confidence in economic growth, and that could affect everything, from investment to consumer sentiment. Moreover, aggressive rate cuts could also lead to inflationary pressures in the long run, which could make things more expensive for Canadian consumers. Ultimately, the success of this rate cut will depend on how much damage the tariffs do to Canada's economy. If the US tariffs create enough economic instability, Canada might need to go further than just interest rate cuts. There could be fiscal measures, trade agreements with other countries, or even direct subsidies for certain industries. The key here is that both countries are maneuvering carefully, trying to protect their own interests while avoiding a full-blown economic crisis. A major question many have been asking is whether China will bear the brunt of these tariffs as intended by President-elect Trump. After all, Trump's American First agenda is aimed at curbing China's influence and pushing for fairer trade practices. But the reality is that the tariffs Trump has proposed are likely to hurt US consumers more than they hurt China. While China is certainly impacted by the tariffs on its goods, it's the American consumer who will ultimately pay higher prices. When a tariff is imposed, it doesn't directly affect the country that the goods come from. Instead, the importing country, in this case the US, pays the extra fees. This means that the US companies importing goods from China will face higher costs, and these costs are typically passed down to consumers. For example, if a US company imports a popular tech gadget from China and that product is subject to a 25% tariff, the company might raise the price of that gadget to cover the added cost. As a result, US consumers will find themselves paying more for products they used to buy at a lower price. This is where the issue becomes tricky for US businesses and consumers. Many American companies depend on cheap imports from China to keep their prices low, and if those prices increase due to tariffs, it could lead to inflation in everyday goods. US CEOs have already started sounding the alarm about this, warning that the higher prices resulting from these tariffs could harm both businesses and consumers alike. Many US CEOs are expressing concern about the impact of the proposed tariffs. Companies that rely heavily on Chinese imports have warned that these tariffs will increase their costs and could lead to higher prices for consumers. Industries like electronics, apparel, and manufacturing could see the biggest price hikes as they rely on affordable materials and products from overseas. For example, if the cost of imported steel from China increases due to tariffs, companies in the automotive and construction industries will likely pass those costs down to consumers. At the same time, some CEOs argue that these tariffs are necessary for leveling the playing field with China and reducing trade imbalance. There is also the long-term hope that China will eventually agree to more favorable trade deals with the US, which could benefit American businesses in the future. However, the short-term impact on US consumers is undeniable. Many households could find themselves paying more for everything from electronics to clothing, which could strain budgets, particularly for middle-class families. Ultimately, what we are seeing here is a complex web of trade relationship, economic strategy, and political maneuvering. Tariffs are meant to penalize foreign governments and incentivize them to change their trade practices, but they come with significant consequences from consumers. While Trump may argue that tariffs are necessary to protect US jobs and industries, the reality is that consumers often bear the brunt of this policy. Higher prices for goods reduce access to affordable imports, and potential job losses in the industry that depend on global trade could all be side effects of these tariffs. Moreover, the ongoing uncertainty about tariffs and trade policy is making it harder for businesses to plan for the future. Companies might delay investments, increase prices, or scale back operations in response to the changing economic landscape. The longer the uncertainty continues, the more likely it is that businesses will make adjustments that could lead to job losses and economic slowdowns. So what can we expect moving forward? We are likely to see more heated history between Canada and the US. As both countries leverage their economic power to protect their interests, Canada's threat to cut off energy exports is a sign that they are willing to fight back against US tariffs, and the potential for interest rate cuts in Canada shows just how much this tension could affect both economies. At the same time, US consumers and businesses are bracing for higher prices, and the long-term effects of these tariffs on global trade remain uncertain. Ultimately, the future of US-Canada trade relations depends on how both sides approach these challenges. Will cooler heads prevail, or will the trade war escalate further? Only time will tell, but one thing is clear: the economic fallout these decisions will be felt by consumers, businesses, and governments on both sides of the border. Thank you for watching, and let's continue this conversation in the comments below. Let's share our thoughts and perspective with one another. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on this story and more. I will see you in the next video.